Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Today in Sports Betting here with winnersandwhiners.com for Wednesday, April 29th. Before we get into today's topic, just a quick announcement. Unfortunately, Scott Steen is still sick with a sinus infection, and he is not going to be joining me today. However, he has given me his word that he will be back tomorrow. So for tomorrow, Scott Steen and I will get the band back together, and we will continue to talk about some other topics in the betting sphere. We're specifically going to be looking into esports, talking about some ways to bet it, how to handicap it, etc. As we're going to be bringing on Winning Willie to talk about what he does, especially since he's been on quite the heater lately in esports. So he will talk about his strategy and how he looks to attack the esports markets. So look forward to seeing that over the next couple of days. But for today's card, of course, no real sports going on besides Russian ping pong, and I'm not really familiar with that at all. So for that reason, we're going to be looking at the NFL, and as yesterday, we ended up going through the player props for some of the rookies that got drafted over the weekend. Today, we're going to be transitioning over to the awards, and we're going to be looking at some value plays as well as who I think are going to be lifting some trophies by season's end. So we're going to be looking at the MVP, the Offensive Rookie of the Year, the Defensive Rookie of the Year, the Defensive Player of the Year, the Comeback Player of the Year, as well as the Coach of the Year. And we're going to be starting off with the MVP, which is the one that everybody wants to talk about. First of all, huge discrepancy in the lines available at different sites, so shop around and try to get the best line available. Mahomes, of course, is the favorite to win the MVP. He's somewhere in the realm of plus 350 all the way through to plus 400 in most books. However, BetOnline does have Mahomes at plus 600 to win the MVP, and at that line, at that price, you just have to take that. So Mahomes plus 600 is definitely where I would look right now on BetOnline. They did have a bet boost last week to put that at plus 1,000, but there was a bit of a bet limit there and is currently off the board. At least that bet boost ended. You can still get a plus 600, and at that price, that is definitely the best Mahomes price you will find on the market. So I would recommend going on BetOnline and putting a bet there if you do think Mahomes is going to win the MVP. Now, if you want to look at some futures that have some value with regard to the MVP, they're pretty tough to find, especially since the MVP is mostly just a popularity contest between quarterbacks playing on the best team in the league, or top, I'd say, 10 teams in the league. You can argue that, it's not always just about quarterbacks, but for the sake of pretty much every award nowadays, it is. The quarterbacks tend to win and dominate most of these awards. Makes perfect sense, though. Wide receivers don't get the ball enough. Running backs get the ball, but get injured a decent amount. And quarterbacks are always given all of the credit and all of the blame whenever a team wins or loses. And I feel like that transitions well to the media who are actually voting on these awards. So for that reason, I feel like quarterbacks are definitely going to be the move when it comes to betting on all these props. I'm not saying that you should immediately avoid betting on all running backs or all wide receivers because you might be able to buy out, especially since some books now allow you to actually buy out instead of hedging. So you could find some value on a wide receiver at, I'd say, plus 10,000. Then if his odds go down to plus 6,000, you could hedge out. So there are ways to be profitable when it comes to a running back and a wide receiver in all of these props. But at the end of the day, save your money, bet on a quarterback. A quarterback's going to win these awards, I'd say, about 9 times out of 10. So when coming to the MVP, I do like Mahomes to win it. I think plus 600 is a steal. And I think that after not winning it last year, Mahomes will probably do whatever he can to win it back with most of the offense returning. If you want to look for sleepers, though, I definitely would look towards it's kind of tough, though, because the issue that you have with the MVP is that your team needs to be pretty competitive in order to actually win the MVP. They're pretty specific when it comes to avoiding teams with bad records because you can't really be the most valuable when your team's not very good. So you can already eliminate roughly, I'd say, half the teams in the NFL because most of the teams are going to be bad. If I had to look to a potential sleeper, I would look to Carson Wentz at plus 2,800 there. I think that Wentz, when healthy, I think everyone can agree he's a phenomenal quarterback, and he probably would have won MVP had he not gotten injured against the Rams and ended up winning the Super Bowl anyway. But Wentz was probably the favorite to win MVP that year, and then he ended up getting injured. If you wanted to look towards some people at different positions, you could look to a Christian McCaffrey at plus 5,000. It's pretty much the only running back I'd actually look into because he has the ability to go for over 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving. So you can make the argument that he's not just a running back. He also is a very solid pass catcher. So he's able to do multiple things. But really not many options here from a value perspective. If you wanted to go for some long shots, you could go for some defensive players if you wanted to go through that route, but really just not a fan of many of these options here because I don't think many of these quarterbacks are going to be making the playoffs to actually build a resume for themselves to win MVP. So for that reason, I'm pretty much looking at Mahomes. You could argue Russell Wilson, but I already know Mahomes' numbers are going to be through the roof. And Seattle, when healthy, even though Wilson had great numbers, did love to run the ball last year with Carson. I think that will eat into Wilson's touchdowns. Chiefs ran the ball a little bit late in the year with Damian Williams for touchdowns, but Mahomes has so many yards when healthy, and he has so many touchdowns, and just, I mean, he's a highlight play waiting to happen. Lamar won it last year. I don't think he'll win it back-to-back years because winning the back-to-back MVPs is relatively unlikely just in recent memory. So for that reason, I think Mahomes is the choice there. So I would take Mahomes at plus 600 on BetOnline. And with that, we're going to be moving on to the Offensive Rookie of the Year. Now, similarly to the MVP, stick to quarterbacks here. It's definitely not. It's definitely a lot more unlikely for a non-quarterback. It's a lot more unlikely for a non-quarterback to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year than the MVP. But for the Offensive Rookie, I think you're pretty much looking at, I'd say, pretty much one guy. I mean, there's no real other way to put it. I think Joe Burrow is going to be the play here. I know that you might think that, I'm going with chalk, taking favorites. That's a bad way to look. But at the end of the day, he might be the only quarterback who got drafted who's actually going to be starting. They got drafted last week that's going to be starting during the regular season for all 16 games. Burrow has already pretty much been declared the starter after they said that he's been progressing extremely well with the playbook. Tua still has injury issues, and I still think Miami's going to ease him in. Flores knows, even though the tank worked and got them a potential franchise quarterback and 3 first-round picks, it's a multi-year process. And according to most betting markets, Fitzpatrick is still a huge minus to be starting week 1. So if Tua is going to be having less than 16 games to work with, that definitely will hurt his chances, and I do not think he has a good shot at winning. Second lowest odds is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I don't really understand those odds at all, especially since Damian Williams is still on the roster. So I don't really understand why he would be at that price. Doesn't make much sense to me on that one. So for that reason, I'm going to have to skip out on him just as a running back as well as just for that price. I think that price is ridiculous. Now, if you wanted an actual sleeper on who could potentially win this thing, the sleeper, I guess, would be Justin Herbert. Do I like Herbert? No. And do I think he's going to be starting all 16 games? No. But if Tyrod Taylor hypothetically gets injured in preseason, you should see this line move. And I think if Herbert does get the nod week 1, I think his line should drop to somewhere around plus 900. So for that reason, I think you could get some value there at the current price. But I wouldn't take it now. I would wait until you actually see if he's going to be starting week 1. Burrow should be starting week 1, and it's currently plus 215 on DraftKings, but you can get it at plus 250 on BetOnline. So for me, I'd have to lean to Burrow winning the Offensive Rookie of the Year at plus 250. He's the number 1 overall pick, so he's automatically going to have a lot of attention on him. He's still a very solid quarterback, best quarterback in the class, in my opinion. Cincinnati, even though they're going to be bad, he should put up a decent amount of numbers because they're going to be trailing a lot. And after getting A.J. Green back after not playing last year, as well as drafting T. Higgins in the second round and having Tyler Boyd still on the roster, I do like the weapons that Burrow has at the receiving core. I think Burrow should put together a pretty good rookie campaign, all things considered. So for that reason, I would take Burrow to win Offensive Rookie of the Year at plus 250 on BetOnline. Now, moving over to the Defensive Rookie of the Year, sorry to disappoint again. I'm going to be taking chalk, and I would take Chase Young to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. Huge line disparity, though. DraftKings has Chase Young at plus 200, and BetOnline has Chase Young at plus 400. So if you do want to take Chase Young for good value, you could end up taking him there. The limits are very low on BetOnline, though, so I'm going to warn you, a plus 400 is still a good deal, and I would personally lean that way. Same reason, kind of is why the quarterback tends to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. You go based on stats, and a cornerback can be really good defensively, but unless they put up a ton of interceptions, they're not really going to be winning many awards. It's the thing about the NFL. Pro Football Focus definitely does a better job of taking into account how valuable a player actually is. But for all these AP writers and voters and stuff, Okudah, for example, could have Revis syndrome, where teams just don't throw the ball his way because everyone else is so bad around him in comparison. which definitely, I'd say, hurt Revis' statistics. Everyone knew how good he was and how Revis was the top corner in the league for years. But at the end of the day, his stats weren't exactly impressive in terms of interceptions and past defenses because they never threw his receiver the ball. I think that could happen here with Detroit. I think Okudah is a phenomenal player, and I think he will make a couple Pro Bowls during his career. But Detroit, the rest of their secondary is so bad, I don't know why you'd actually throw it to Okudah's side ever when everyone else on the Lions' defense is underwhelming, to say the least. They did end up acquiring some free agents who might help out that secondary. But at the end of the day, I do think Okudah is the best corner on the roster. And I do think that because of that, I don't think he will put up phenomenal stats. I think he'll play really well, but I don't think he's going to put up phenomenal defensive numbers that will lead to a nice Rookie of the Year campaign from an award-winning perspective. So for that reason, I'm personally going to not include Okudah. I don't think he has a real shot. Simmons, Arizona already announced that he's going to be exclusively playing linebacker and he will not be playing safety, which should cut into his interception total, but it should help out with his tackles. Simmons could potentially win it. I don't really see it. I think if any rookie has a double-digit sack here, I think they're going to be one of the favorites to actually win the award. So for that reason, I have to link to Chase Young. However, if you do want a sleeper on the Defensive Player of the Year award, I do think that you have to look towards Derrick Brown because of the fact that he is just a phenomenal defensive lineman. I think he's almost impossible to block. He's going to come into the league, and people are going to realize early on, how are we supposed to stop this guy? And if you want to get a good price, he is available at plus 2,500 on DraftKings and at BetOnline. So if you do want somebody who can be a massive threat on the interior and who can just make his presence known extremely quickly, Derrick Brown is going to be that guy. I think if you wanted to argue about his productivity, he could be a disruptor, not to the level of Aaron Donald, but in a similar fashion, where Derrick Brown could easily end up having double-digit sacks, and he could also just clog up the middle, and every team's going to have to game plan for him. Kind of like Ndamukong Suh when he came out of Nebraska, and everyone thought that he would just absolutely maul the offensive lineman. Didn't exactly work out to that degree for Suh, but he did have the ability to get a lot of recognition at the defensive tackle position because of how dominant he was. And I think Derrick Brown does have the physical attributes to be that dominant. So for that reason, I think he would be a good sleeper there if you are looking for a sleeper in the Defensive Rookie of the Year. But for me, I'm going to stick to chalk, though. I do think Chase Young should end up with double-digit sacks. It's going to be almost impossible to double team him now that you still have Jonathan Allen and Ryan Kerrigan on the defensive line. I think Chase Young should end the season with, I'd say, at least 12-plus sacks. So for that reason, I think he will be pretty tough to beat. I do think Derrick Brown does have a shot at reaching 10. So for that reason, I do think that he would be a good sleeper price for value at plus 2,500. And those are my thoughts on the Defensive Rookie of the Years. Now, moving on to the Defensive Player of the Year, I have two sleepers here. This award is probably the hardest award to predict in the NFL, just because you have injury aspects. There's a lot out of your control. You can't control how many interceptions or how many sacks a player is going to have. So it's going to be pretty difficult. Of course, it's a lot easier for defensive linemen to get sacks than it is for defensive backs to get turnovers. But either or, I'm not really going to look to any favorites here. This seems to be a long shot prop where you kind of look to find value. Of course, Aaron Donald is always going to provide a convincing argument along with Khalil Mack, and how you could just argue about their sack totals and how dominant they are. But at the end of the day, the two sleepers that I do like here, I do like Chandler Jones at plus 2,000. That's the first sleeper that I like. Main reason, Chandler Jones has been one of the most underrated defensive players pretty much his entire career. He's been phenomenal. And if you looked at his numbers last year, he actually led the NFL in sacks, and pretty much nobody realized that. Arizona's defense isn't great. I do think Simmons will help out, but Jones has been an absolute force on the defensive line, and I think he should be able to have a very solid year. Jones, it's all about numbers here for the voters and everything like that. And if Arizona is going to be a more high-profile team because of the DeAndre Hopkins pickup and because of the fact that teams actually think Arizona might be somewhat competitive this year in the NFC West, I'm a little bit more skeptical of that because I do think the division is extremely hard. But the media has been talking about them a lot. They will be a team that people will definitely be interested in because of the offense with Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury and now DeAndre Hopkins. I do think that this team might be in line to get a couple of more primetime games. So based on that, I do think that Jones will be seen a lot more on prime time, whether it's going to be on Fox in late games or even on Sunday or Monday Night Football. So for that reason, I think Jones should get some recognition there, and I do think that he will have a very solid year once again. So for that reason, I will lean to Chandler Jones plus 2,000 as the first thought on the defensive player of the year. I'm actually just going to do a quick search to try to see if there are any better lines available. But as far as I know, that seems to be the best line that is available here. Looking at BetOnline, it's plus 2,800. It's plus 1,800, so it is a better line on DraftKings. So I would lean to Chandler Jones there at plus 2,000. And my second sleeper, if you wanted to look towards defensive player of the year, is going to be Minkah Fitzpatrick at plus 3,300, which is available on DraftKings. I personally think that Fitzpatrick, if he was not traded mid-season from the Dolphins to the Steelers, I think he could have potentially won the award. Fitzpatrick was phenomenal. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. He completely transformed that defense. It seemed like he forced a turnover almost every game, whether it was an interception, a fumble recovery, anything like that. Fitzpatrick was just remarkable with the Steelers last year. And if the Steelers, with Big Ben coming back, might be able to potentially make a playoff push, and I think at plus 3,300, I think that line is a bit too high. I think that should be somewhere in the plus 2,000 range, plus 2,500, something like that. So for that reason, I know that it's a lot tougher for secondary players, even though Stephon Gilmore did just win. It's going to be tough to get a defensive back to win awards unless they're actually able to force a decent amount of turnovers. But Fitzpatrick has the ability to do that, and I do think that Pittsburgh, with that elite defensive front, should be able to force quarterbacks into making some bad decisions. So for that reason, I think Fitzpatrick should be able to force a decent amount of turnovers, kind of like a Polamalu in that defense. Of course, Polamalu is an all-time great safety, and Fitzpatrick isn't fully there yet, but I do think Fitzpatrick has that game-changing ability, and I think at plus 3,300, it is definitely a solid deal to look at. So the two sleepers I have for Defensive Player of the Year are going to be Chandler Jones at plus 2,000 and Minkah Fitzpatrick at plus 3,300. Now, looking forward to the Comeback Player of the Year, this award is also pretty tough because you have to wonder what exactly constitutes a Comeback Player of the Year. Is Antonio Brown considered a comeback player, even though he is a head case and he got himself pretty much thrown out of the league? Does that count? I don't know. Does Nick Foles count as a Comeback Player of the Year when he played last year or just didn't play well? Does Myles Garrett count when he got himself suspended for basically trying to assault somebody on a football field? Does that count as a Comeback Player of the Year? Probably not. I don't think Garrett will win any awards because I think the voters are just going to have it out for him because of what he did on the actual field last year against Pittsburgh. So I wouldn't include really any of those. The favorites, Rob Gronkowski at roughly plus 200 on DraftKings. I have no interest in picking Gronkowski. He already showed signs of decline in his final season with New England. Now he's going to a new playbook after not playing last year. I am not interested in taking him in the slightest. Big Ben is a little bit of a wild card because of the serious arm injury, and you have to wonder if he will look like the same guy. J.J. Watt is always a fan favorite, and the media loves him, so that's always a decent option at plus 700. You could look at A.J. Green. I don't really see that, though. I do think, though, that in terms of value, this line seems a bit low, but I do think it makes a lot of sense. I actually like Matt Stafford at plus 700 here for Comeback Player of the Year. He played, I'd say, roughly the first half of last year. He was putting up phenomenal numbers, and then he ended up getting injured. Stafford, though, with that offense and that awful defense, I do think that you should see the Lions trailing in a lot of games, which should help Stafford's stats, and that's pretty much all this award is actually for. I think Stafford could easily end the season with 30-plus touchdowns and roughly 5,000 yards. I think that wouldn't be that far-fetched based on what he's done over the course of his career. Big Ben, even though the Steelers should be winning more games, they still have Connor. They still have a very solid defense. They can win games without Big Ben putting up massive numbers. If Detroit is going to be even slightly more competitive than what people think they're going to be, Stafford's pretty much going to have to go off. And I think at plus 700 for a guy who's always known, according to the VSiN sphere, as Stat Padford, is what he's known because he doesn't really win many games, but he puts up insane numbers. The Comeback Player of the Year award is basically who can put up massive numbers after coming off of injury. And Stafford is a perfect candidate for that award. So for that reason, I would lean to Stafford there at plus 700. I think that he should be in line to have a very solid year with Galle, Marvin Jones, all those guys. And I think that that should be a pretty solid recipe for a pretty good offense. Defense is still going to cause this team to finish in last, in my opinion, in the NFC North. But Stafford could easily put up massive numbers. So I'll lean to Stafford there, plus 700 for the Comeback Player of the Year award. Now, moving on to the Coach of the Year award. This award is also extremely hard. However, my advice to you, which is pretty obvious, pick a playoff team. It's really that simple. You could have argued that maybe Flores should have deserved some votes last year after he turned around Miami and they ended up going 5-4 down the stretch in their last 9, despite looking like they were going to go 0-16 for the first, I'd say, 8 weeks of the season, 6 weeks of the season, give or take, before they ended up beating the Jets. Really, you're looking at playoff teams. Belichick is the favorite to win the award. I think that's an absolute joke. I think there's no interest in taking Belichick here. This Patriots team on paper really looks underwhelming, and I don't think he's going to win the award with Jarrett Stidham at quarterback. Something that will definitely hurt. I think New England is going to look a little bit like Pittsburgh did this past year, where the team defense is going to be really good. The offense is going to look completely lost because of who their quarterback is, and I really just don't think that is a good option. Mike McCarthy with the Cowboys is the second favorite here. I don't really get that either. Cowboys defense is terrible. I don't even think they're going to win the division. So for that reason, not interested, which brings me to the people that I do like. I would lean – Shanahan's always an interesting case at plus 1,600. You could claim that Harbaugh could win it again, but the voters, kind of like what happens with the MVP, don't really like to give recognition to the same guy in multiple years in a row. They kind of like to spread it out, give recognition to multiple people. And for that reason, I think at the current price, I don't know how you don't take Andy Reid here at plus 2,000. Kansas City, in my opinion, is either the best team in the AFC or the second best team in the AFC. And as you saw last year, they just won the Super Bowl. So they are clearly a top 3 team minimum in the NFL, probably top 2, arguably top 1. I think they're the best team in the NFL, even though Baltimore might be a little bit better defensively. But you can't really go against Super Bowl champs. And Reid did not win the trophy last year. So I do think that might come back to bite Harbaugh at plus 2,200. I don't think the voters are going to vote for the same guy again unless Baltimore goes like 15-1 or 16-0, and I don't see that happening. I think the Chiefs are still the best team in the division. I still think they should end up winning roughly, I'd say, 12 to 14 games with Mahomes, assuming that he's going to be healthy for a full 16 games. The reason why Reid didn't win it last year was because of the fact that the team record wasn't amazing, and that was mostly due to the fact that Mahomes ended up getting injured for roughly a month and Matt Moore had to take over. If Mahomes takes snaps for all 16 games, I think Kansas City should end up having either the 1 seed or the 2 seed in the AFC. And I think at Reid at plus 2,000, Reid's very loved by the media. Fans love him as well. He just won a Super Bowl. I wouldn't be surprised to see them add another trophy to his collection with the Coach of the Year award. So for that reason, that's pretty much going to recap all of my thoughts on the awards. Just to run through them one more time, for MVP, I would go with Mahomes at plus 600. I don't really see many sleepers here besides Carson Wentz at plus 2,800. I think that has some value there. Deshaun Watson, you could argue maybe if he can carry Houston to a playoff berth. I just don't think Houston's that good. I think Bill O'Brien basically destroyed the entire roster, so I'm not really interested in that. So for me, I would take for each of these props, I'll give out once again just a recap on who I think is going to win the award as well as a sleeper to win the award. So once again, MVP, Mahomes at plus 600 is my favorite, and I think that he will probably win it. But for sleeper, I would have to go with Carson Wentz at plus 2,800. Moving on to offensive rookie, not really many sleepers here, but I do like Burrow to win it at plus 250 on BetOnline. And for sleepers, I would wait it out. But if Herbert potentially starts week 1, I think he could be a potential sleeper. But I don't think that's likely. So for me, I think it's Burrow or bust here for offensive rookie. Moving on, defensive rookie, you have Chase Young at plus 400, which I do like in terms of value on BetOnline. And if you want a sleeper, I would lean to Derek Brown plus 2,500, which is available on DraftKings. Now, moving on to Defensive Player of the Year. Don't really have a favorite here. Both of these are kind of sleepers, not fully long shots, nowhere in the plus like 10,000 range. But Chandler Jones at plus 2,000 I think is pretty good. And Minkah Fitzpatrick at plus 3,300 I do think has some value to it as well. And those are my 2 thoughts for Defensive Player of the Year. And moving on to Comeback Player of the Year, really only have one candidate. I do like Matt Stafford at plus 700. just based on the MO of his career, puts up a ton of numbers, and I think that is exactly what they're looking for comeback player of the year. So Matt Stafford would be my thought there at plus 700. And moving on to coach of the year, Andy Reid at plus 2,000, I think is a very solid deal, especially since the Chiefs are pretty much locks to make the playoffs in the upcoming year, assuming that Mahomes stays healthy. So for that reason, I would take Reid at plus 2,000. And those are going to be my thoughts on the awards for the upcoming NFL season. Other than that, though, that's going to do it for this installment of Today in Sports Betting here with Winners and Winers for April 29th. Scott Steen will be joining me once again tomorrow. Other than that, though, good luck to all of you and your respective bets today. Bye, everyone.